I'm delighted to introduce Brian Moody, who is Data Endura's Vice President of Managed Security Services, or Managed Security Services Practice. I'm super excited to have you here, Brian. Welcome.
Here, thank you.
You're in the hot seat.
It's red.
Yes, for a reason. No, thank you for joining us. Hope y'all have had a great summer. We titled this Tech Talk Small Steps, Big Protection. And we did that for a reason. We're taking a look at a lot of the news out there, just even this week, with the FBI taking down that enormous botnet. We saw in August the SEC come out with new cybersecurity rules and expectations for public companies. And there's so much activity that continues to go on out there. Yet we have organizations saying, this is so big, how do we get there? And so what we thought we would do is just kind of peel apart both what we're hearing from the SEC and why that's important, right? A lot of organizations out there aren't public, but you kind of see what the SEC does as the canary in the coal mine, maybe, that once they start talking about things and setting new expectations, that trickles down. It trickles down because although you're not public, maybe you have a partner who is, maybe you have a supplier who is, and all of a sudden what the SEC is talking about becomes very important for everybody. So we'll start there, but then we're really going to dive into what that means for smaller businesses and how you can think about protecting yourselves. So Brian, when you look at what the SEC is talking about, what stood out to you?
Well, a couple of things. I think that what we've seen in the industry for years and years now is what comes out at the government level, what comes out very, very high up, absolutely trickles down through, the publicly traded companies, corporate companies, down into enterprise, small enterprise, and then definitely down to small business. I think what we've seen historically with the hacker community is they have gone after the whales, so to speak. They've gone after the publicly traded companies. And I think over the last multiple years, what we've seen is a dramatic change in their strategy. They're going after small business. Mm-hmm. There's no question. We're seeing more and more small businesses get attacked, get ransomware attacks. So this SEC announcement with respect to new kind of compliance, new reporting rules, I think that it's going to drive from a standpoint of that maturation that we already see in, I think, public and the larger corporation environment. It's going to drive kind of a direction, I think, of the attack community to even go after small businesses even more. Mm-hmm. One of the critical things I thought that came out of the SEC is the 96-hour notification rule. Most large corporations will have infrastructure in place. They'll have security operations. They'll have things like SIEM. They'll have log management. They'll have the forensics to be able to go back to understand what happened. But 96 hours, I mean, we're already seeing a grumbling coming from the community that are going, no way. I mean, if you've been attacked within the first 48 to 96 hours, you're just trying to figure out what happened. Right. You're digging back into your security infrastructure. You're digging back through those logs. You're doing forensics to understand what happened. To have to come to market and say, this is what happened to us. Mm-hmm. I think the other point I think that is going to be a huge topic of challenge is the material aspect of the attack. The SEC is saying if you've had a material attack, if so you've had something to you that is material, define material, right? They may have a vastly different definition of material than you might within your business. Mm-hmm. They're saying that the investors deserve to understand this or hear about this information based upon the material. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to be a huge legal challenge. I think it's going to be a huge challenge amongst organizations to say that, well, we didn't report because it wasn't material. Right. So I think those were two of the big things that really stood out for me with respect to kind of what the SEC said.
And yeah, I looked at that 4-day clause as well and just think, wow, for those folks that we've done incident response for, right, at that 2, 3, 4-day period, depending on the sophistication and maturity of your cybersecurity environment, you can be in all sorts of different places at that time frame. And whether you're a large company or small company, that's going to be super challenging for people to adhere to. As we think about the pieces that need to fall into place for you to even be able to attempt. Let's take 4 days out of it. Let's say 5 days, 10 days, for you to understand that you have had a breach, for you to understand where did it originate from, what has it impacted? What goes into that?
This all comes down to security operations. This all comes down to your incident response plan. This all comes down to your ability to leverage technology, to leverage AI, to leverage automation. The critical part about having a mature security infrastructure is the ability for that infrastructure to first detect that something has happened, but then to respond very quickly to it. So with that infrastructure in place, if I have an attack on a machine, if I discover someone in the network, I'm able to very quickly isolate that from the network. If I don't have that infrastructure in place, where we've had instances where we've had a customer attack at 2 a.m, and within 6 minutes, 200 or 300 clients were impacted. We stopped that in 7 minutes. So we were able to stop the attack, pull off the infected infrastructure, and roll that infrastructure back to no good state, and have that company back up very, very quickly. If you don't have the infrastructure to respond like that, and it's what we've seen in the ransomware attacks, is you begin to see these companies get completely encrypted, and it can literally shut your company down. It will cripple you.
Right. So if we roll back and say, those are the components we need. If I'm an organization that is looking at kind of these new regulations coming out, hearing what good looks like, the best place to start would be where? If you're kind of thinking about this in terms of steps or components.
Well, I think there's 4 critical steps with respect to any organization evaluating its security posture. And first of all, there's the strategy associated with security. There's the process with respect to what security processes we're putting in place. There's the technology that we look to implement in order to implement or apply to those policies. And then there's the people aspect of it, which is critically important. So for small organizations that are beginning to look at how do I deploy a security maturity model? First of all, let's talk about that strategy component. It's looking at our organization. What are the goals of our organization? How are we innovating and competing in the market? And then what infrastructure do we have in order to implement that business strategy? What data do we have? So, and then where are we most vulnerable? What are our risks? So this is really a risk assessment. It's a vulnerability assessment. It's understanding what our business is and what our environment looks like.
Well, and that makes sense too, because I'm sure when you're thinking about where are we most vulnerable and all of those things, every business is already invested in something, probably, right? They've got AV or they've got firewalls. And so as you're thinking about the strategy, there are very few people that are probably starting from nothing. And so as you go through that, you're kind of starting to factor in what have you already done, and what's next.
Well, to some degree, because no one has nothing today,
Right.
because that's just it's not possible. But I think once you've gone through the strategy to understand what are vulnerabilities, what are our risks, what do we look like, the second component of that is now what are the processes? And folks have already to some degree done this, right? They've implemented the email, they've implemented the endpoint. But to really draw a great strategy with respect to what are our security processes, what are our security operations, right? What are accessible use policies? How are we going to access infrastructure? And for some organizations do we have to adhere to a framework?
Right.
Do we have compliance based upon our business infrastructure, potentially the business that we're in, the industry that we're in? But one of the critical key components that's been happening in most organizations is what companies we're partnering with or doing business with.
Right.
Because they are now requiring things like SOC 2 Type 2. You have to have a level of security in place just to do business with us or to contract with us. So those processes are pretty important. And then we get to that technology part where we have implemented technology infrastructure. We've implemented the email, the firewalls, the cloud security, the endpoint, and that's the technology that really maps back to the controls. The key point here is it's an ongoing process. And that's what I think many people don't understand about security, is that It's not something that it's set and forget.
Mhm.
And so many people think, hey, I've got email in place, I've got my endpoint in, I've got my firewall in, we've got passwords, we've got multi-factor authentication in, we're doing the things. So we've implemented
Mhm.
infrastructure in order to protect the organization. But they say, hey, we've got it. And it's like they set it and forget it.
Mhm.
It's truly interesting how many organizations that we've been involved with that have a SIM in place. They never look at the SIM.
Hmm.
They actually aren't actually seeing what the SIM's reporting. It's like, we've got a SIM in place, checkbox.
Or it's there in case something bad happens, they'll go look at it after the fact.
Correct.
Instead of using it to help them on
Proactively
the
to
front
help,
end.
to help actually, grow their business. So as their business grows, as they advance contracts and, to begin to innovate in the business that they're in and compete in the marketplace, that security strategy has to grow with the business.
Right. Well, and interesting, you talk about innovation. You look at why the SEC is doing this, you look at why the FBI is doing what they're doing. The bad guys are innovating, right? So we've got the hackers, we've got cyber adversaries that are innovating constantly, finding new holes, new gaps, new opportunities. And therefore, either the company itself has to try to keep up and innovate, or the technology community, the security community has to innovate, right? We've got to keep up with the hackers' innovation.
Well, here's the fine line, and the tough part with most organizations is how strict of a security policy do we put in place,
Mhm.
right? Companies are focused on what they do best,
Mhm.
and they are working to innovate within their product suite, their competitive market to compete in the marketplace. They have to focus on what they do best. The hackers focus on what they do best. So that fourth leg of the table that I talked about, which is the people.
Mhm.
This is the very, very important part with respect to organizations and their security strategy, because it's not a matter of if you're going to be attacked.
Mhm.
You're going to be attacked.
Mhm.
It's just when.
Mhm.
And that win component is where that technology stack, and then the people come in, because your incident response capability, your ability to respond to that attack is absolutely instrumental in protecting your business. The challenge, though, is, as I said, they're innovating and they're focused on what they do best. And most of the organizations we find, especially smaller companies, they have maybe one or two people in the
Right.
organization that are focused on this security thing. And they don't have the resource, and many times they don't have the knowledge to be able to fully implement a security practice,
Mhm.
and it leaves them vulnerable.
Sure.
So why wouldn't you turn to somebody like the hackers, like Datadog, which what we do day in, day out, 100% of the time, 365 days a year, we focus on security and security innovation
Right.
through our managed security services platform.
Right. Well, and I think it's interesting if we go back to the four pieces and four layers you were talking about. Technology comes third, right? You've got strategy, you've got process, and then you have technology. And I think for so many people, and understandably, right, you feel pressure, right? Okay, we're standing up this business, we're standing up, our employees, and we've got to make sure we're okay. And I think sometimes you backdoor, like, okay, we bought all these tools. And maybe you think about strategy later, maybe you don't think about strategy until maybe you're pressured by, you need a cyber insurance policy, or you need something, and then all of a sudden. So you kind of have this very wonky technology stack that, maybe you have a good endpoint detection, or maybe you have a good antivirus or whatever, but all these things also need to work together.
Right.
Right. And thinking about those working together, that could be 10, 20, 30 tools just in the security space. And think about it, you've got your one or two people maybe, or three or four, or however many, but you're trying to make sure that these tools are complementary, meaning whatever they're telling you is consistent, or understanding where the variability is. But then from an innovation standpoint, each of these tools have their own shelf life. So at some point, each of these tools are going to be leapfrogged by somebody else who's keeping up with current threats better. And so while they're trying to innovate in their space, there's got to be somebody thinking about, well, how is this all working? And is it still working? And how do I inspect if it's working? And unfortunately, like you said, the hackers don't discriminate on big, small, industry, whatever. And so small or large, you're needing to think about the same things. And it's overwhelming.
Right. It's absolutely overwhelming. I mean, come on. I mean, how hard can it be, right? I mean, there are over 4,000
Yeah.
tools in the current security tool market. Which one do you pick, right? There's 10 email solutions, there's 10 endpoint solutions, and every single one of those manufacturers is marketing them with the best, right? So not only do you have to select the tool, but to your point, it's so important that they, the telemetry, your ability to be able to evaluate that the tools work together, they complement one another. And building that stack is incredibly difficult. Even, the big Gartners and the data from the industry says, especially around network security, is 90% of most companies don't do network security correctly. And this is where we start talking about access, we start talking about microsegmentation, we really start talking about protecting the industry, because 70+% of the attacks all involve lateral movement within the network, right? So as we begin to look at that tool sets, these companies are struggling with respect to what tool set do I bring to market, or do we implement in our infrastructure. The other aspect is you talk about this leapfrogging of technology. Absolutely. Companies that have their technology that born maybe in legacy type technology, they're having to write. So every time the hacker community actually thwarts a tool, if I wrote that tool, I have to go back and close that gap, the whole ideology of patching, but I have to write to it. One of the things that I think that's very unique about DataEndure is we test the tools on an annual basis to understand efficacy. And we want our tools to be in the top 3 tools that we implement in our infrastructure. Companies purchase a tool and everything is subscription based today, right? So you get into 12, 24, 36 month locking, you're locked in. And if you're locked into a tool that the hackers have found a way to easily thwart, your risk skyrockets.
Right.
It skyrockets.
Right.
And I think that's one of the, again, the unique things about DataEndure is if you are contracted with us, we might change that tool next year because we found that a tool is not effective as what it was before. So that is one of the hugest challenges I think that that our customers are going through is implementing these technology stacks, and then managing. Right.
Well, and you're touching on a topic. When we promoted this event, someone reached out to me on LinkedIn and asked a question and said, how does a company stay good enough security wise yet continue to innovate? And it was interesting because as I thought about it, I thought, well, you could think of innovate 2 different ways, right? How do I do everything I need to do from a security perspective and continue to innovate in my business, which we've talked about? Or how do I do or keep my security strong enough and continue to innovate around that security stack? And on either side of the fence, there are challenges. And what I told him is, it's not that companies don't want to be secure. It's not that they're not smart. It's not that they're not spending the right thing. It's just, this is really, really tough. And unless it is your business to be that innovator, you're always going to be behind and not by any fault of your own. And so that's why we see a lot of people, and we've seen a big uptick in folks saying, I kind of want to get out of this, right? Like, I want to find a special ops team. I want to find someone who can, walk alongside us and make sure, who have our 6, who make sure that any gaps or anything that we're not seeing, the sniper on the roof or whatever, that someone's got that broad visibility on our ecosystem and making sure that we're protected, and where we might be vulnerable, we're on it quickly.
The aspect of that is 7x24, 365, right? So exactly what you talk about is we're on it, but to staff to that is hugely expensive. And if you think about the smaller organizations, they don't have the staff to be able to staff to 7x24 to manage this aspect. Right, they're trying to manage their business. And I think, we've all been in Silicon Valley a long time, been 30 years in this valley watching the growth of technology, the growth of services. We all managed our own IT. IT went to, right, Let us manage the IT for you. Co-location.
Mhm,
Don't have all that power and cooling. Let us do it.
mhm,
Then it went to let us manage it for you, right?
mhm.
So you had the actual service providers. You know, why manage your own applications, right? As a service applications, everything is moving in a direction, I think, that allows organizations to focus on what they do best. And the infrastructure that they take advantage of, the infrastructure they need to run their businesses, let the experts,
Right.
let the people who do that best do it.
Right, the specialized expertise.
More and more we're seeing in the security business that it is moving to let us, and this
Yeah.
is what we do best,
Yeah,
right? We're the experts. We're focused on a 7x24. This is the business that we do every single day, and that we can bring that level of service to you so that you can focus on what you do best and you let us do what we do best.
right. Well, one of the things we had talked about was small steps.
Yeah.
Right? We're talking about big things, big challenges, big consequences. So you mentioned there are likely no people out there that have done nothing. So I might have done a few things. I might have done a lot. I might have not done enough. So how do we move people in those small digestible steps, or how do we help people get to where they need to be, but in a way that either works with their finances or works with the contracts they already have? Let's wrap up with how can we help people take those steps?
Certainly. And to your point, no one has nothing. And I think that is every customer that we've engaged with. I've never been on the phone with someone and they said, oh, we don't have anything. They have implemented pieces. I think what we've done is we've defined what good looks like. We have seen where the industry has gone. We've seen what the requirements that are really needed by almost any business, right? And it starts with email. 93% of attacks come from email. So gateway solutions are not working. So you have got to ramp up your security around email. The second aspect of that is 70% of that 93% needs DNS to communicate with command and control session. So we need to have a level of DNS protection now that will allow us to prevent that command and control session, especially in the world we live in today. DNS is somewhat broken because it's been implemented at the firewall. Well, we're not all inside of our buildings anymore behind that firewall, behind that proxy, right? We're remote. So that DNS defense needs to be distributed. It needs to be out with the client, regardless of where they're at. The third aspect of that is endpoint. The endpoint is a critical component. We've got to have automated AI capabilities, machine learning capabilities on the endpoint, so that we can react very quickly when something happens on the endpoint. It's not if, it's when. And then the endpoint really is the gateway to our network. So network security is another key component. And then I keep bringing this person type thing back because people are so important in security today. And you can put all this infrastructure in place, like I said, and people set it and forget it. For us, and you've heard Shaheen say this 100 times, it's like sticking a guard tower up, but you don't put a guard in it.
Right.
So that human aspect is absolutely important. So what we found as we work with companies is that you may have put pieces in. So one of the things we do at Data Endure is we create an economic roadmap for you, and we create a total cost of ownership. So we can come in and do a security evaluation with you to understand where you are in your security maturity model. Any one of our services can be used as a gap service. So here's the critical point. We're not asking you necessarily to change out, write a new check for what you've done.
Right.
What we're going to do is evaluate what you have in place and how it's protecting your business, where you have vulnerability and or risk. And then if we have a service that we can gap in order at a smaller dollar figure, because now you're not replacing the whole thing, we can gap into what you have. And then we create an economic roadmap, understanding your contracts, what their expiry dates are. And then we will do technology evaluation with those in comparison to the services that we bring to market, and when an appropriate time might be to switch that tool out, or it may be an important and integral tool to your security model. It may be something that stays in.
Right.
So with our security operations, and when we implement our SOC as a service or our SIM, we can take telemetry from those tools that you have that are important to your business and provide that 7x24 security operations and management to that tool set.
here's what I like about that. If I'm a smaller or mid-sized business, I like the fact that I've got expert eyes on what I've already done. And by the way, it's complimentary, right? The security health check is complimentary. I like that someone's looking at what I've done. They're telling me, okay, here's good, here's scary, here's this, here's that, but who's kind of walking alongside with me and saying, well, we can fill this gap here, we can do this here, but I mean, I'm getting kind of this experts, I just keep saying eyes on my business, that can kind of help me more comfortably and confidently grow my security maturity.
Because it's an ongoing process.
Right,
This
exactly.
is something that I think most businesses really need to wrap their head around. Security is an ongoing, continuous process.
Right,
You have to continue to grow and adapt to what, current indicators of compromise are,
Right.
or current threat
Right.
vectors are. And so it's not something that you set and forget.
mhm,
And having those experts with their eyes on your business, they're the ones, I mean, we get the security feeds on a daily basis. We understand what's happening in the attack framework.
yeah,
So being able to apply that to your business and show you where your vulnerabilities are, I think it's a peace of
Cool.
mind that we've heard that lets
Yeah.
people sleep at night.
with that, I've received a note from our producer that we have a question that came in. So, Mr. Producer, what's our question?
How would you suggest a small company with 100% remote employees attack cybersecurity beyond the standard AV, OS firewall, etc.?
Do you want to repeat that question?
Yeah,
Or
so
our
the
audience?
question is for a small company with say 100 people that's completely remote, how would we recommend that they approach cybersecurity beyond kind of some of the standard components? First of all, the critical aspect of that is access. For us, VPN technology is broken. And most organizations implement some type of VPN technology. Well, we're fine. It's in the cloud. Well, no, all we've done is move the concentrator into the cloud, and we're accessing that same type of technology into the cloud. For us, the first aspect is how you're having those folks access the infrastructure. And for us, it's critical around zero trust access. So we have brought to market, and we suggest that you evaluate how they access the infrastructure versus VPN. Is we utilize a zero trust model that microsegments the access. So we're looking at the security of the machine first, and then tying into the security of the user. So tying into any MFA that you might be using, but also into that Active Directory information, so that we can constantly monitor the user and the machine and the security score. In addition, we segment what those users and what those machines can see, so that if they do get breached, that lateral movement that I mentioned before can occur within your infrastructure.
Right.
Endpoint technology is also absolutely important. So I talked about email, I talked about DNS, I talked about endpoint. So these are critical components that you need to make sure that you deploy onto that technology. So advanced email protection, which is not just gateway, we recommended an advanced phishing solution. And then security awareness training is so important for the users, because the phishing attacks that are coming in are so ridiculously
good.
mature.
Yeah.
They're so good. And it takes one click.
Yeah.
One click.
Yeah.
So that security awareness training is important, and we think should happen on a monthly basis. That distributed DNS defense, I think you should look at technology associated with how do I get DNS defense on my remote workers' machines,
Mhm.
so that if they do click on something, we can prevent that command and control.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, a robust endpoint security solution is very important with respect to the additional features and protection.
And with all of this, like you mentioned, is having some people on the back end, keeping an eye on it, right? The 24/7, even if you're 100 people, right, that having those people or access to that team
Right.
that is watching that environment and making sure things are okay.
Well, I'll come back to a point that I made. It's all about the response.
Yeah,
Right. It's all about, and that's utilizing technology, but that's people.
right, Right.
Your incident response is really about your organization and your people, and
Yeah.
how you're responding to the attack that is going to happen.
right.
Don't kid yourself and think that you're not going to get attacked,
Right,
because you are
right.
going to. It's
That-
how you respond to that attack that's important.
Yeah, and I think if I were the person that asked that question, I think, okay, you've just mentioned 3, 4, 5 tools, people. I can't afford it. And the beautiful thing about managed security services, right, is that you are not buying all these tools. You are not hiring all these people. And so not only do you have access to this mature security stack, in a very cost-effective basis where you're paying per user or per node, this can be implemented for you within 30 days.
Right.
So you have an acceleration of services and you have an extremely cost-effective model that wouldn't be available to you if you're trying to do it yourself.
I talk to people on the daily with respect to their security infrastructure and what we bring to market. And when I talk about what we put together, that endures XDR offering, extended detection and response, which includes that mail, includes the DNS, includes the endpoint, and then includes an entire proactive approach to security and continuous incident response. So I talk back to the point of responding. What is your response? We provide that continuous incident response for that 100% included.
Right.
So
not
the
extra.
first thing that they tell me is this is too expensive. Because if I were to go build this, it would be expensive. And that's the right answer. The difference is after 7 years in business, 26 countries, 4 continents, we bring economies to scale to our customers and license costs to our customers that they can take advantage of a pricing model as if they were a 20 or 30,000 person company.
Well, with that, I'm having one more note from our producer. With that, we will wrap up. What I would offer to you folks, Brian talked about the economic roadmap. If you are listening on this live stream, if you've got some questions of understanding, if you need any gaps filled, please reach out to us. I mean, as I mentioned, it's complimentary and we would love to help put eyes on your systems for you and let you know what's going on. The other thing, if this was valuable to you, feel free to follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to our newsletter. You will be advised of when our upcoming events and live streams are. With that, Brian, any closing thoughts?
I would just say, don't feel like you're alone. This is hard. Cybersecurity is incredibly difficult and the hackers continue to mature even more every day. The key to the game is making sure that you're in the game and you're playing. And again, as I said, it's all about the response and your ability to respond to the attack that is going to happen. And if that infrastructure and that's in place, then you can protect your business. But don't feel alone. It's hard. Everyone has this challenge. It's scale, of course, given your organization, but we can help.
Fantastic.
We can help.
Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you.